So friends, Renaissance period. In second year, completely there were the poems which were solely taken from the Romantic school of literature. That was Romanticism. We read, and Romanticism remains to be the most popular era amongst the students. And in BA Part Third, we are chiefly concerned with Victorian era, Victorian literature. So here we are supposed to study some of the notable poets from British literature. They are Tennyson, Arnold, Robert Browning, G.M. Hopkins, and some others. So before I come to Tennyson's very famous poem, which is highly inspiring and motivational, that is Ulysses, I would like to suggest you to have an outline of that era, of that school of literature, of that age. These are called the ages of literature, the schools of literature, the periods of literature. So I think you haven't forgotten the definition of the periods of literature. Periods of literature means when we divide the continuity of literature into certain segments, into certain parts, are called the periods of literature. These periods are invented for the sake of convenience, for the sake of study, for the sake of exploration, right? They are man-made, they are made by critics, they are made by scholars and thinkers. So there could be some overlapping of time and place, of works and scriptures, but still there has been a a crystal clear outline of such periods. So friends, uh, when we talk of Victorian literature, when we talk of Victorian poetry, then what do we understand by this Victorianism? You see, this Victorianism. So, and why do we call it an era of Victoria? So, all such questions come naturally to our mind. So, friends, in its value neutral use, in its strict sense of the term, Victorian simply identifies the historical era in England roughly coincident with the reign of Queen Victoria. We associate the entire era with the reign of Queen Victoria. It was the time when Queen Victoria was reigning in England. That's why this period is called the period of Victoria. And that is why the literature composed during this time is called the Victorian literature, right? So it spans from 1837 to 1901. This is the actual date, actual year, which you can keep in your mind for examination purpose and for the purpose of knowledge, right? So the period starts from 1837 and it lasts till 1901. This is, you could see the dates, 1837 and 1901. Now this is the beginning, or not exactly the beginning, this is rather the middle part of the 19th century, and it touched the beginning of the 20th century. So 19th century Europe, you see, 19th century Europe and 19th century Britain were having some of the crucial time from the point of polity, from the point of industrial revolution, from the point of some of the developments taken place in the field of science and technology, and some of the developments taken place in history and politics, right? And it was the time of rapid economic and social changes. So all such things naturally got reflected in literature at the time which was written. So uh, friends, it was a time of rapid and wrenching economic and social changes that had no parallel in earlier history. You see, it was that time when changes took place in the history of Europe in that speed, in that pace, that it never took place before in history. Neither in the times of Renaissance, such rapid changes in the field of science, in the field of industry, in the field of technology, in the field of transportation, in the field of navigation, in the field of social sciences, and in the field of art. You see, and it was the time when England as a power had its under control most of the parts of the world. This period is also known as the colonial period, you know, looking to its military power, looking to its navy, and looking to its alliances with other powers of that contemporary period. Britain enjoyed its utmost uh, supremacy politically, particularly politically and culturally. So you can also correlate this time to the colonial India. This was the time, 1837, when Britishers, or rather the East India Company, as the representative of colonial powers, was trying to settle down in India, right? So it was the wrenching economic and social changes that had no parallel in earlier history. Changes that made small scale England in the course of the 19th century the leading industrial power with an empire that occupied more than a quarter of the earth's surface. Yes, more than a quarter of the earth's surface. This was the situation of the contemporary England, that it had under its control most of the parts of the world. Everywhere its representatives went and occupied the place in polity. This is, not only they occupied the place, but they also occupied the polity of those places, as it occurred in India. That the Britishers first came to India as traders, as merchants, as mercantiles, but later on they became the rulers over here, right? So it was the beginning of the colonial rule. number one. You can understand better uh, the literature of this era when you compare these paradigms with each other, right? The pace and depth of such developments, while they fostered a mood of nationalist pride and optimism about future progress, also produced social stress, class conflicts, and widespread anxiety about the ability of the nation and the individual to cope socially, politically, and psychologically with the cumulative problems of the age. Yes, friends, this is very important to note that on the one hand, looking to industrial revolution, looking to technological advancement, the progress of industry speeded up, increased to a considerable number and degree. The production grown, the goods produced and grown, and they came to the market. In this way, the cycle of economy ran, and this entire cycle produced a huge wealth, a huge amount of wealth. And finally, this wealth went in the hands of the capitalists and owners. So, on the one hand, there was an emergence of capital. So, it was the beginning of the age of capitalism, also, on the one hand. But you see, what happened as its reaction, that it resulted in social stress, it resulted in class conflicts, is resulted in emerging two classes in society, the haves and haves not. That's why we find uh, novels like Oliver Twist, where the villain comes from that class who doesn't have anything, and we find a range of characters who are elite and you know aristocratics. So this pace of progress, the so-called progress, the so-called you know shine shining of industrial revolution also produced social stress, class conflicts, and anxiety about the ability of the nation and the individual. Both were struggling. The nations were also struggling because they were not having independence, they were not free, they were under the colonial rule. So nation was in struggle, and secondly the individual was also in struggle because he was not able to cope, he was not able to adjust himself with such changes, the changes which were occurring on the platform of society, on the platform of politics, and definitely on the platform of psychology. Finally, what is man? What are the sources of happiness and delight? And where uh, can we become the most happiest creature? Because it was feeling at the time that the wealth is not able to give, deliver, or delegate delight and happiness, right? So that's why later on we come across the poem like Wasteland, that was published in, though it was late publication in 1922, but still finally the world becomes wasteland, the civilization becomes wasteland. So the entire uh, you know beginning of this era was quite problematic for everyone, not only for nation but also for individuals. England was the first nation to exploit the technological possibilities of steam power and steel. Yes, this was the height of industrial revolution. This was the height of technological revolution, that it was able to okay, just a minute. It was able to understand the possibilities of steam power and steel, but its unregulated industrialization, while it produced great wealth for an expanding middle class, led also to the deterioration of rural England, a mushroom growth of often shabby urbanization and massive poverty concentrated in slum neighborhoods. Right. So I think we shall continue it later on.